Okay, thank you, Tom. And I'm with Nature Conservancy's Chicago Conservation Program, so I'll be talking about a project that I and colleagues here in Cook County have been working on to address stormwater as a major environmental issue in our area that also has some impacts downstream on the Illinois River as well, and really is an issue in most of our urban areas around the country. So, stormwater overall is a huge issue in Cook County, partly because we are such a flat geography that has been covered to a significant degree by impervious surfaces, and with a lot of clay soils to begin with. So local residents here in Cook County experience significant urban flooding, which is non-riverine flooding in terms of street flooding and basement backups, and combined sewer overflows at alarmingly high degree here across the county. And much of that is very disproportionately impacting low-income and minority neighborhoods. So there's a huge equity issue as well. Nature Conservancy in our urban conservation programs are really interested in issues like this, where natural infrastructure and natural solutions can make an impact on vulnerable human communities and make a difference for biodiversity as well. So this is an area of a lot of interest for us. Talking just a little bit about how Cook County and Chicago area has traditionally approached stormwater management, it has really been about big infrastructure projects, most famously with the Chicago River reversal that folks in the Illinois River are all too familiar with, but also large projects like the TARP system, which is our tunnel and reservoir system that's in process of being built and coming online to store massive amounts of stormwater. And we are already seeing the benefits of that, and at the same time that it is not sufficient with climate change to manage all of the stormwater in our area. So there's a real need to look at additional solutions, including integration of natural solutions. And certainly that is being done here. There are requirements in Cook County for stormwater detention, which I'll get to in a minute, which is really about holding back stormwater, often in detention ponds, but sometimes in underground storage as well. And obviously the more naturalized detention basins have a lot of co-benefits, environmental co-benefits for wildlife and really for people to enjoy as well, especially as compared to underground systems. There are also requirements for stormwater retention, which is holding some of the stormwater on site, which can be, again, through sometimes gray infrastructure, but also green infrastructure, including green roofs and constructed wetlands and different types of systems that also provide a lot of environmental co-benefits locally. So we're very interested in those. And at the same time, I think it's important to note that natural infrastructure for stormwater occurs at a range of scales, from these kinds of site interventions for localized natural infrastructure to more interventions on a community scale in terms of parks and constructed wetlands and green streets, to things that are happening in the city with new parks and parkways and the overall tree canopy, and then regional scale with nature preserves and what's happening with forest and agriculture and riparian corridors. So we're really interested in looking at all of those arenas. But the strategy that we've been investing in significantly and I'm focusing on here is looking at stormwater really as a potential environmental market. And so to set that up a little bit more, what we see in many places, including Cook County, is an issue with the placement of stormwater natural infrastructure. So Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, which oversees stormwater management in Cook County, requires that new development and redevelopment to manage stormwater, that new development and redevelopments are required to manage stormwater on site. So that means there are requirements to get new infrastructure, often natural infrastructure, associated with these kinds of developments. At the same time, most of the areas that have the greatest vulnerability to urban flooding are disproportionately economically challenged without a lot of new construction. And so, and these are a lot of the areas we're showing in blue on this analysis Nature Conservancy has done. And these are the areas where we'd really like to see a lot of new natural infrastructure to protect people and for all kinds of benefits. And those are not the places that are getting a lot of new natural infrastructure just because of market forces. So we're faced with this question: how do we get more natural infrastructure for stormwater where it's most needed? So stormwater markets or stormwater credit trading is a new solution that is being tried in a number of cities, most successfully in Washington, D.C., where Nature Conservancy is involved heavily in that market. And we've been investigating this with our MWRD and with our partner Metropolitan Planning Council here in Cook County. And to walk through briefly what this looks like, this is a really high-level overview of it, but in any market you have supply and demand. And on the demand side for stormwater, you would typically have some type of a developer that has a lot of space limitations for how they're going to manage on-site stormwater as they're redeveloping, or usually it would be redeveloping their property. Likely they'd have to put stormwater systems underground, which is expensive and also doesn't have much in the way of co-benefits. On the supply side, you might have a landowner that needs some stormwater management solutions, but doesn't have a way to pay for them. The example here is a church cemetery in Washington, D.C., a project that TNC has been involved with, where they took out part of the roadways and put in natural infrastructure to help reduce localized flooding. So and to improve water quality. So the developer in a credit trading scenario can purchase stormwater credits from the supplier who's built this system. And those credits cover the developer's requirements from the local utility for managing stormwater. Part of the way this works is that there need to be some guarantees in place that the supply site where this is coming from is a place that really needs stormwater infrastructure, and that the site where the demand is coming from is not going to suffer new flooding issues as a result of purchasing these credits. So that's in a nutshell how these markets work. So we call this concept in Cook County STORMSTORE, which our partner Metropolitan Planning Council has trademarked. And the idea for this STORMSTORE stormwater credit trading market, we see a tremendous amount of benefits. It allows more intentional siting of natural infrastructure for priority areas. It can provide more equitable investment in those areas, and at the same time, more environmental benefits, because less of the infrastructure, basically infrastructure will be going to where it can be done less expensively. And usually that means above ground with more natural infrastructure and less gray infrastructure. It also can create a centralized marketplace, creating some efficiency around building natural infrastructure, and allow for participation by the private sector, bringing in new capital for even investment by new actors in this kind of a market. So a number of cities around the country are investigating these kinds of markets. Washington, D.C. is where this is most extensive and in place, but there are other markets existing, including in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is developing a market that could be quite similar to what Cook County may eventually have, and Los Angeles, where there is a market that TNC is involved with under development as well, and a range of other types of environmental markets that we've been looking at as models for this as well. So part of the work that Nature Conservancy and our partners have been involved with then is looking at what is the feasibility of this kind of a market in in Cook County. And we looked at these three areas. What is the potential for demand? What is the potential supply? And how close are we to the policy mechanisms that would allow for stormwater trading to take place? And the answers on this is that, from what we looked at, yes, there's significant demand, there's extensive potential for supply. Policy is more of a challenge, but we have some good news that I'll talk about in a minute that we're looking at there. So to talk briefly about these different components, on the demand side, our contractor did a detailed real estate and stormwater engineering analysis across the county, looking at MWRD's stormwater permits from a 10-year period, 2006 to 2016, and found that basically, between 17 and 21% of all the projects that were permitted for stormwater during that time period would have benefited significantly enough from stormwater trading that they might have been likely to use it, which would have resulted in significant economic benefits, overall of almost $50 million, an average of $240,000 per project. And those are represented geographically across the whole county. That's what the dots on here show, in all of the major watersheds that MWRD looks at. I should point out the city of Chicago is not considered in this study or in the policy we're looking at. It's really suburban Cook County. That's a longer conversation why that is, but we are looking at the city of Chicago too. With Cook County, with the supply analysis for Cook County, MWRD did a parallel study that they funded, looking at both detention and volume control or retention opportunities, and basically found there's significant land available that could supply these opportunities for a market, basically in all watersheds of the county. So what about the policy side? Well, MWRD has technically allowed trading in stormwater, but in such narrow circumstances that no one has done it to date. But the MWRD Board of Commissioners is on the cusp right now of approving a new pilot study for two of the 6 watersheds. So they will be establishing pilot trading areas in the Lower Des Plaines watershed in central western Cook County and in the Little Calumet watershed, which are both priority areas for Nature Conservancy in terms of urban flooding priorities for us and real human need in the face of climate change. So we're really excited about this. And MWRD is going to be allowing this for 5 years. And this is really, we see this as part of an outcome from some of the advocacy that we and partners have been doing on this concept with MWRD. So some of the next steps for us with STORMSTORE, and I should say for my colleague Jenkins, who's on the call, I believe, and is our natural infrastructure project manager here in Cook County for Nature Conservancy, is that we'll be continuing to advocate with MWRD for additional changes to their watershed management ordinance, the WMO, to make it easier for the pilots to expand. There are still some policy issues that we think are going to be some barriers for trading to occur, but we have a window to do that in. We're also working feverishly on developing some proof of concept trades that will quickly demonstrate in both priority watersheds what the potential of this strategy is for environmental and flooding benefits, and then also working to identify resources for funding and investment in these sites and strategies. So we see this as a real opportunity for Cook County, but also as another example for how environmental markets may be useful in a range of places, including perhaps in the Illinois River. And we are grateful to our funders, including Grand Victoria Foundation, Kinsit Foundation, Chicago Community Trust, and McDougall Foundation. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions if there's time.
Thank you, John. We do have a few minutes for some questions. And just a reminder to all of you in attendance, on the lower part of your screen is a Q&A button where you can type in some questions that Doug will be moderating. So Doug, I'll turn things over to you right now.
Okay, thanks, Tom. It seems like a concept that could be applied to helping manage floods in urban area or suburban areas as well. such as along our rivers. What would it take to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's a range of things that are needed to put this kind of policy in place. The one we've been struggling with most here in Cook County really is the policies that the local utility MWRD would put in place to make it possible. I think if you're looking at a riverine system, you would need to have some type of overarching governmental or authority or utility that's managing flooding in that system and managing stormwater across that could enact that is responsible for stormwater permitting to really be able to put something like this into place.
Here's another one. This sounds like a good idea. Why hasn't it happened before?
That's a great question. I guess a couple of reasons. Management of and permitting of stormwater in a lot of places is relatively new. MWRD's stormwater management ordinance that we're working under here really is less than 10 years old, and so so I think that's a part of it. I think that it's also pretty complicated. And one of the things we're finding is that we can't just pick up the model that Washington, D.C. has and apply it here. They have some different drivers there in terms of how US EPA is regulating their nutrient loads going into the Chesapeake Bay that are really driving that system. So it's not as simple as picking up a regulatory model from one place and applying it elsewhere. It takes a lot of work to tweak it locally. And so I think that has slowed it down as well. But one thing we're definitely seeing is interest expanding across the country just in the time. I've been working on this for a few years. More and more places are talking about it and studying it. So I think we are going to see more of it happening in different places across the country.
Good. Here's another question, John. Are there problems of displacement where a solution is happening spatially at a different location than where the credit was purchased?
Sure. In other words, yeah, I think this question sounds like it's about whether the supply project would be in a similar watershed so that the benefits from that would be accruing to basically the same area where the development is happening. That's a challenging, there are different approaches to that in some of the different places where this is happening. The way that Cook County is looking at it is that the county is divided into 6 watersheds, and that are each regulated with specific release rates on their stormwater and on stormwater detention. And the county, MWRD is looking at allowing trading within a watershed, but not between watersheds. And there are some people who are not as comfortable with that large of an area, but it's also true that if you make the trading area too small, it becomes almost impossible to link up supply and demand projects. And so that level of trading area has seemed to us to be one that threads the needle, I think, of matching benefits and locations with adequate market size we anticipate.
Good. I think that's all